Hi BookTube, and welcome to my Friday Reads video. 4 books completed, 3 on the go. So, Tokyo Redux by David Peace. Adorable by Ida Maria Hede, a Danish author. And 2 more Leonardo Sciascia books, one fiction, one non-fiction. So The Day of the Owl, which is a novella, and The Moro Affair, which is non-fiction. So I'm going to start with David Peace, favourite author of mine, a favourite, not the favourite. This is the 3rd in his Japan trilogy, all based on real crimes that happened in the aftermath of World War II when Japan was under American occupation, all quite noirish, with a detective at the heart of them. 10 years between the second one in the trilogy called Occupied City and this one, and the reason that Peace gives in an afterword in this book is that he didn't realise how much writing there was on the crime that's at the centre of this book. It's really a bit like sort of Japan's JFK, really. So that put his schedule back somewhat. And there are 3 time periods in here. The first is 1949. When the president of the Japan Rail Network was found dead on the tracks, having been run over by a train, and an American detective called Harry Sweeney, who's part of the Occupying Forces Administration of Law and Order and Security, is on the case. Then we have 1964, just before the Tokyo Olympics, when an author has disappeared. And his publishers, who have advanced him monies, want to get the money back because clearly the book is not going to be delivered. And they contact a Japanese private eye to track him down. And then we come to the 3rd part, which is when on the eve of the the Emperor of Japan dying. I think it was 1988. And an old spook, American spook, is at the heart of this part of the book, and feeds back into the other 2 previous crimes. So what to say about this? So I really enjoyed the first 2 parts that were noirish, sort of detective style, with David Peace's well-known style of sort of lots of repetition of interior thoughts. And although it's a bit more restrained in this trilogy than in his work set in England, but I did enjoy both of those. The main question is, did this, they find out the sort of the secrets of the dead guy. So was it suicide, or was he bumped off? And if so, by whom? Was it the Russians? Was it the communists in Japan who were quite strong in the aftermath of the war because this guy was going to throw 100,000 workers onto the scrap heap? Or was it actually a sort of an inside job manipulated by sort of the American occupying forces in order to combat communism, that sort of the Japanese population would be so appalled by this crime that the communists would be blamed, and it would drain their support away from them? Or was it in fact the Russians asking their communist agents to do it, knowing the full well there would be such a sort of backlash from the Americans and the Japanese state that it would force the Japanese communists to adopt a revolutionary road? So those are sort of the conspiracy theories behind it. And as I say, the 2 detective sections of 1 and 2 fizzes along at a good pace, and I enjoyed it. The disappeared author has a theory on what happened in the case, and that may have something to do with his disappearing. And right towards the end of that, the book takes a sudden lurch, and it gets a bit surreal. It gets a bit sort of Marasad by Peter Weiss, a sort of bit of sort of deals with sort of madness, which is always in there in David Peace novels through this repetition and this obsessive fixations of his characters through the language. So it's always there, but here it's sort of spelt out where it looks like a scene that's taking place in a mental institution, and they're holding a seance, and sort of characters from the past are taking part in the seance as against appearing as the spirit voices. It all goes a bit sort of weird, But I will say, without spoiling, how that is resolved is just a brilliant sort of sleight of hand by David Peace. You know, why it's done like that, what its purpose is fabulous. So up to the point, but the first two parts of this, I'm totally into it. You know, sort of on sort of hovering between 4.5 and 5 stars. But then we get into the spook, and I found that much less compelling. And I wonder if that's literally, I'm more interested in detectives than spooks. You know, I've never read Le Carré. I don't really have much interest in Le Carré and those ilk of books. And I didn't particularly get much out of the third part. You know, it was one conspiracy turn after another. It was under two flags. You know, which side is this spook really on? Does he even know which side he's on? Is he a red? Is he an American? It was all done very well, but I had no interest in it really, compared with the first two parts of it, which dropped this down to a straight 4 stars. So the end of his Japanese trilogy. For me, Occupied City, the middle one, is the best, which is done in a Rashomon style. So you get 16 chapters of 16 points of view on a terrible crime of a mass poisoning in Tokyo. I think that's the strongest. They are stand apart. You know, the characters, there's only one instance here where characters are even referenced from the other two books. So you can read any of them in any order. They're only a trilogy in terms of the setting of post-war Japan under American occupation. And on to Adorable, which I have to say wasn't adorable. I made a mistake. I thought this was by the same Danish author who wrote The Employees, which I enjoyed very much last year and got into the shortlist of the Booker International. It isn't. It's a totally different Danish author. So, my bad. So this is a book, I suppose you'd describe it as experimental, though I wouldn't. Divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is a man referred to as B, a woman referred to as Q, and their child, which is that sort of Anglo-Saxon A merged with E. I'm sure it has a name, I don't know what it is. And it's very sort of bodily fluids of the baby, written in a stylized style. This isn't sort of straight, you know, realism. Reminded me of Ed Atkins, A Primer for Cadavers, and it reminded me of Anatomy Lessons by Blake Butler, in that sort of immersion where the image is the body fluids. They sort of drive the narrative, such as it is. And then we come to the second part, which is very short. So it's sort of 3 pages on what happens to the dead after they die. And then we have a significant section called Death Essay, where the author is considering both her own death and the death of others, particularly her father, which is right in my alley because I've written a novella about that very subject, but I didn't get a lot out of that. And then the fourth part returns to BQ and AE. So there's nothing really to say about this because, yeah, it didn't work for me. So 3 stars. And on to I'll do the fiction first of the Sciascia, The Day of the Owl, which is the one of his books that has most been centred around Sicily. He is Sicilian, but he wrote about the whole of Italy, but based on his Sicilian sort of experiences. And we have a northerner down from Parma on Sicily, which, you know, straight away gets people's backs up. He's the chief of police or the chief of detectives, and he's investigating a crime of murders of 2 men in a very short space of time. And it's you know, it's theorised it's a mafia. They're both down to the mafia, although in this book the mafia is not named, can never be named because it doesn't exist, and that is what he is fighting against. This guy is hard but fair. Even though he's a northerner, he sort of gets grudging admiration from the people of Sicily, and it's, you know, it's very solid. It's the least sort of metaphorical of all the books of his I've read, and I give it 4 stars. And on to the Moro Affair, though, which is non-fiction. Aldo Moro was a former Prime Minister of Italy who was then made president of the Christian Democrat Party, which is the ruling party in Italy for 40 years after the war. Virtually a one-party state, although technically it was in coalition with other parties. but never the Communist Party, until this point in the 1970s, where Moro had just struck a deal to bring the communists into government. At which point he is kidnapped by the Red Brigades, who are a left-wing terrorist organisation with sort of Marxist ideology, and they hold him for 55 days in Rome because the police are so incompetent that they can't find Moro. And then they kill him and bundle him in the back of a Renault and tell the authorities where they can find the dead body. But the heart of this book is the fact that Moro was allowed to write letters in captivity. And this put me in mind of Antonio Gramsci's Letters from Prison. Gramsci was a Marxist who sort of improved upon Marx, I think, by reintroducing a sort of cultural means of control into, Marx having taken all that out because only scientific laws of history mattered. And Gramsci was held in a Mussolini prison and died there, but again, wrote letters. And the difference here is that Moro's letters are a mixture of, obviously he doesn't want to give the game away, but he wants to try and give clues, because Moro's theory is that the longer he can hold out, the more chance that the police will find him and the security forces will find him, of which he was very badly let down on. So his letters, they're a bit wheedling really, because increasingly he's sort of begging the authorities to sort of do sort of exchange of prisoners, this, that and the other. And the Italian state, which has never really been a state under the Christian Democrats, it's been a state within a state of the Christian Democrats, selling off contracts to their cronies and all this, sort of all this sort of stuff, suddenly finds its balls and decides that it is a state, and a state can't negotiate with terrorists, which absolutely appalls Moro. But his letters are wheedling, whereas Gramsci is maintaining a great dignity. And I have very little sympathy for Moro in this, which I don't know if that was quite what people should feel. He was a civilian, but equally he was the head of a government which was very corrupt. What Sciascia does so well, though, is the literary component of his view on sort of politics, and that he says that when as a prime minister, Moro had this sort of language that was just intended to obfuscate and not have any meaning, an empty language, a jargon language. And suddenly here under captivity, he has to abandon that, he has to change his language. But it can't be sort of fully open and straight. He had to sort of try and leave sort of coded messages and stuff. It's very interesting on the language in here. And it's just an all-round brilliant book. Again, in the same way as I said, the head of the railway department in Japan's murder was their JFK moment. This was very much Italy's JFK moment. And again, the way Sciascia writes it, it's like he's almost a sacrifice to the Minotaur. That such was the nature of the Italian state, with all these sort of secret powers, things feeding into it, like the Catholic Church, the Masons, the fact that you've got sort of Red Brigades on the left and you've got right-wing terrorists on the right, a lot of whom were actually doing it under sort of state, the powers of the state were sort of enabling them to do it. The state of the nation of Italy was so rotten and corrupt that this was almost an inevitable move. It's like a chess game, but done on automatic pilot, so that it's inevitable that the Red Brigades would snatch Moro at the time in which the communists were invited into government. It was inevitable that the Italian state was so poverty-stricken in its abilities that it wouldn't be able to find Moro. It was inevitable that suddenly all his old cronies and allies decide to abandon him and move on to the next level of Christian democracy and the next set of people who are going to dominate it. So all these things, come together in a perfect storm, much to the unluckiness of Aldo Moro. So I'm just going to read a couple of bits. But let us go a step further with Borges' fable. The impression that everything which occurred in the Moro affair did so, as it were, in literature, derives mainly from the elusiveness of the facts, a sort of withdrawal of the facts, when they occurred, and even more so in retrospect, into a dimension of unfailing imaginative or fanciful consequentiality, from which a constant stubborn ambiguity overflows. Only in fantasy, in dreams, is such perfection achieved, not in real life. Or more prosaically, anyone can evade the Italian police in its present state of training, organisation and management. But it's not so easy to evade the laws of probability. Yet, according to the statements broadcast by the Minister of the Interior concerning the operations the police carried out between Moro's abduction and the discovery of his body, the Red Brigades did indeed evade the laws of probability, which is realistic but can't be really true. And here, so this is an interesting definition, I feel, on the word consecrate. This lofty term should not be used for merely human matters. To consecrate is to make sacred by formal words, deeds and rites what was most sacred. Formal words, the defence of the state. Rites, the murder of 5 men who were Moro's bodyguards when he was snatched. The execution of a death sentence. So, you know, this was absolutely superb. This is 5 stars because it is non-fiction, it is reportage, but the insights, the weaving of literariness into the book, in its analysis, this notion of a Minotaur. He does introduce the notion of the Minotaur. That's what I took out of it. The Minotaur at the heart of the labyrinth that has to be fed, that has to have sacrifices made to it, was very much what I think he's getting at in this book. And it's that sort of coming together of non-fiction reportage analysis, but also the literary, the metaphorical, the symbolic, because this is all about symbols. The Red Brigades were acting in this manner as a symbol. The Christian Democrats were, they had all their symbols of what society was. It's all done on a symbolic level, but of course at the heart of it is a real-life human being who is executed. Yeah, superb. And on to what I'm currently reading. So, Nervous System by Lina Meruane, a Chilean author. This is a buddy read with Roxy over at A Chaotic Bibliophile. This will be finished next week, this buddy read. Detransition Baby, which by Torrey Peters, which is a buddy read with Zena and Brian at Bookish. And I'm delighted to say Roz at Scully Dangling around the books has joined in and caught up. And we're going to have our second check-in on Sunday. Just say the first check-in we had, which was without Roz at the time, lasted about 3 hours of back and forth over boxes. So this is a very thought-provoking, provocative book, which engenders a lot of discussion. I'm really looking forward to Sunday's discussion to see how long that's going to last. England are playing Croatia, so it better not go on all day. And finally, Garbage, a poem by A.R.Ammons. This was recommended by Courtney Ferreter. I'm halfway through this. I will finish this weekend. So there you have it. That's my Friday reads. Thanks very much. Till next time.